Okay. Good morning. We are just about there we go. Now we're on Facebook too. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to History Matters and So Does Coffee. And so does this little bird next to me, who we will meet during the after party. Um, Today we're going to be talking about the Department of Education. Uh, Not only is it an important moment too, but this organization is an important group to talk about it with. But before I plunge into this very important topic, I turn to my partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History, and every Friday it is my great joy for us to gather here. And today, as Joanne mentioned, the topic is talking about the Department of Education, something that is very important to me as an educator. So here's how this works. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. Let us know in the chat, and we will give you a robust welcome. We want everybody to enjoy chatting while Joanne talks for about 30 minutes. But we really want your questions about today's topic, and those are going to go down below in the Q&A. I'll be back in about a half an hour, and then we'll have a discussion.
Excellent. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Department of Education, a little bit about its history, a little bit about what it's supposed to do, and a little bit about why in the world someone would want it to go away. But first, some basic information. And I will say, as Annie just said, if you're here for the first time, please say so in chat. And you will get a robust welcome from this wonderful community that has been here for years at this point, this amazing community. Okay, Department of Education. So the Department of Education at this point, yeah, I know, I see you over there, you. The Department of Education is a cabinet level department of the United States government, which actually began operating as recently as 1980. And as I'm going to talk about in a moment, the idea of having a Department of Education or of centering efforts on a federal level to deal with education actually has a long history, which, of course, given that we are here on History Matters, I will discuss. And as you will also hear this morning, there are predictable reasons why over time, repeatedly, it has come under attack. So this is certainly not the first time that someone has stepped forward, a president or wannabe president has stepped forward and decided that we don't need a Department of Education because why should anything on a federal level have anything to do with education? Jimmy Carter actually signed into law the fact that there is a Department of Education in 1979. It began operating in 1980. So it was kind of nice this morning as I was preparing for our conversation to stroll down a little bit of Jimmy Carter memory lane. I actually want to do him a little service here by quoting him. He, according to things he said at the time when he was debating and then deciding on promoting the idea of a Department of Education. He said, education is a fundamental right. Imagine that. And he thought that the federal government had some responsibility to promote fairness and opportunity in schools nationwide. He wanted to address systemic inequities. He wanted to assure equal access to education. And now these are his words. He said, generally, I am opposed to the proliferation of federal agencies, but the Department of Education would consolidate the grant programs, job training, early childhood education, literacy training, and many other functions scattered throughout the government, and the result would be a stronger voice for education at the federal level. And he continued by saying, when he signed the bill, that today's signing fulfills a longstanding personal commitment on my part. My first public office was as a county school board member. As a state senator and governor, I devoted much of my time to education issues. I remain convinced that education is one of the noblest enterprises a person or a society can undertake. This is the first time I've done a live anything with this new bird, and the new bird clearly has a lot of opinions. Now, it's worth noting that the idea of having some kind of a Department of Education actually goes all the way back to 1867. And the idea of having the federal government involved in education goes back longer than that. And we've talked about this before on History Matters. The fact of the matter is that the question of education has been a political issue as long as there has been a United States. Why? Because the assumption from the beginning was that the only way that a republic, a democratic republic, would survive would be if its citizens understood what it was, how it worked, if they all had at least some fundamental education to understand what threats to the republic looked like, so that they could find them when they happened, they could notice them, they could be alert to them. They could step forward and defend the nation from threats if they needed to, and then go back in a sort of Jeffersonian idyllic way, back to their farms and do what they were doing beforehand. But the assumption from the very beginning, and they talked about education, even gasp, women's education, going all the way back to the founding era, because the assumption was this nation would not work unless its citizens understood the government, understood what it meant to be a citizen, understood what was going on around them. So education has been political and politicized from the beginning. Not surprisingly, after the Civil War, it was political in a different sense. President Andrew Johnson actually signed in 1867 legislation for a Department of Education. And he saw it, and those who supported it with him saw it as a way of collecting information and statistics about the nation's schools and giving advice to schools along the lines of the way that the Department of Agriculture did similar things for farmers. Now, interestingly, the idea of a Department of Education had the support of abolitionists, and it was part of the post-Civil War effort to spread education to formerly enslaved people in the South. So not surprisingly, it was controversial. It didn't last for very long. It started out as a department, and in a very short amount of time, it was demoted to an office of the Department of the Interior, and it really wasn't until many years later that it was promoted once again. It was really part of, and again, this shouldn't be surprising in many ways, it was part of the politics surrounding Reconstruction and rebuilding the South, educating formerly enslaved people, and the North considered education as one of its real strengths. And so, again, as part of bringing the nation together, the Union thought that it would educate people and spread what it considered to be one of the strengths of the North, the idea of education, by having this kind of federal effort. Obviously, this was highly inflammatory to former Confederate leaders. So it was resisted, it was fought. There had been a common school movement going in the North along the lines of what I started out by saying. There's always been an idea in this country that people deserve at least a minimal amount of education. They should have it. It is their right. But because of questions of race and questions of segregation and questions of all the reasons why people did not like, particularly ex-Confederates, the idea of Reconstruction, it didn't last for a very long time. So it was the first attempt goes all the way back. Carter is the person who stepped up and really, in a serious way, tried to create this department. Back in 1868, when it became controversial and some members of Congress began to discuss dissolving the department a whole year, not even after it had been created, one Connecticut newspaper published an editorial trying to explain why it was good to keep it. And they said, in addition to providing information, in addition to supporting efforts to educate the formerly enslaved, it could collect data that would allow the federal government to, for example, compare the success of different school systems in different states, could show other countries the efforts that this country was doing to educate its citizens, could show what investments in our public school system, what they were doing, what kind of progress was being had. So there were many reasons why, and among many of them, and Carter talked about this too, when he wanted the Department of Education, that there were many people who needed some federal assistance for one reason or another, and whether it was for reasons of race, whether it was for reasons of being underserved, whether it was for reasons of needing extra help. There are any number of reasons why he felt that the government could help fill that gap, could step in and ensure that, again, what he felt was a fundamental right, education, the federal government could help make sure that all children enjoyed the benefits of that fundamental right equally. Now, in the same way that education has this long history, there is a long history, as suggested by what I've been saying about Reconstruction, of people opposing this whole idea. And there have been time and time again, in one way or another, post-Reconstruction, the modern Republican Party has come up again and again in opposition to this idea, arguing that the federal government has no constitutional authority to be involved in school curricula. And they wanted, in one way or another, again and again, to end federal meddling in our schools and to promote family choice at all levels of learning. So, for example, in 2000, the Republican Liberty Caucus passed a resolution to abolish the Department of Education. And there have been again and again and again, time and time again, where Republicans have stepped forward and said that there's no place for this in the federal government, that it should be local, it should be families. Now, this brings us to our current moment. And why we are at this moment and what is going on at this moment and what can or might happen with the Department of Education. And actually, I want to pause for a moment here because I want to point out several things about the Department of Education and public education generally that are vitally important. And I've said this before too, and this is not a stunning new fact, but it's an important fact. Public education is a, what do I want to call it? A basis of democracy. Why? Because it means that Americans all deserve to get an education. It brings Americans of all kinds together to learn together so that people aren't sort of branched off into little segments of rich kids or kids of one race, that it brings people together and joins them in learning. There has always been a democratic component to the idea of public education. I am proud to say I am a total product of public education. So I believe in that enterprise from the bottom of my heart, always have, always will. It is thus, in a sense, not surprising. I see little muscles going up on the side of the screen, little emoji muscles. Yes. So public education supports democracy. Public education has to do with the big national we. If you are arguing that there shouldn't be public education or that it's too strong or that the federal government should have nothing to do with it, in a sense, what you're saying is there should be no way to track or measure or understand what's going on around the country in the realm of education. And obviously, the administration that we have now is not very excited about having the federal government have information of various kinds on a broad sweeping level that will inform people about what's going on. It appears to be cutting back on all kinds of ways in which there's information that we American citizens who basically fund the government with our tax dollars increasingly seemingly are getting less and less and less access to the information that in one way or another we are supporting the collection of. Why now attack the Department of Education? Well, obviously, if you do not like the idea of diversity, if you do not like the idea of equity, and if you do not like the idea of inclusion, all of those things being positive things, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, you can string them together and say DEI and pretend that it's some horrible virus. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are good things. They are. And the fact that I have to utter that sentence says a lot about where we are right now. A diverse country is a strong country. We all deserve equal opportunity in this country, and we may not have it yet, but we deserve to have a country that works towards it. And We are a big we. We should be an inclusive country. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are positive things, right? So if you are saying that you do not like those things, we do not like DEI, the woke mind virus, or whatever buzzword is currently being touted as the horrible thing to fight against, then I suppose that's one reason why you're going to say, well, we want to destroy the Department of Education. We don't want that kind of federal supervision. We don't want the government being able to look and see what's happening on a local level. We would much rather have things happen on a local level where perhaps there can be different kinds of control exercised. And again, we don't know. Local levels, and we've talked about this is along the lines of what can we do in this moment? Locally is one level at which we can actually exercise our rights and have an impact, but that's true for everybody on a local level. But if you are trying hard to cut off a certain kind of knowledge, if you're trying hard to erase any sign at all that there are things that this nation has done right and wrong in the past, and that we need to learn from what we've done wrong to do better in the future. If that problem makes you feel uncomfortable to admit that this nation has done things that are wrong and that we need to do better, if that's a problem for you, that's a problem with the truth, and that is an education problem. And I suppose that would make you not like having a Department of Education that has some role just in watching what's going on a federal level. So part of what's going on right now is an attempt partly to chip away and continue to erode at any kind of regulatory agency in the government. In part, it's another kind of attempt for presidential power, because the fact of the matter is the president doesn't have, formally speaking, the power to eliminate a department funded by Congress, right? He can't just say this doesn't exist anymore. Now, that's easy for me to say. The fact of the matter is that there needs to be enforcement of the fact that a president can't do that. And we are at a moment where it's unclear what kind of enforcement there is. So to say that we are at a moment of extreme contingency is the understatement of the era. But still, cutting back the Department of Education, which a president would not be allowed to do, but we're in this moment where we're watching as it happens to see what happens. It's a way to prevent, cut back on an agency that just has general oversight over ensuring that on a national level, education is happening, people are being served, there's some equity, that horrible word, of opportunity for people of all kinds in the United States to be educated. So this is the moment that we're in. I have numbers here, but I'm not going to bore you with the numbers. All told, why cut back on the Department of Education? To fight against the so-called wokeness that people love throwing around as a buzzword, and to basically show off, I suppose, in another way, the power that this president wants to display, having that isn't generally constitutional, that has very little to do with the Constitution. So that's kind of where we are. I'm running a little short on my comments because I actually really want to open this conversation to questions. And I want also Annie to have a chance to comment too. And I didn't say to her beforehand, you're going to have a chance to comment, but I'd like her to, because she's very involved in questions of education and policy and teachers as well. So it shouldn't just be me. And many of you here who are watching are also teachers. I know suddenly Annie's like, I really want to open this up because this is the company within which this conversation really should be happening. And clearly, Bird Without a Name has been feeling this earnestly throughout this conversation, to the point that it's a little hard for me to focus because the bird is very loud and echoey here. And I do see, I want to open chat so I can see. Yeah, I know, I'm paying attention.
Yeah, Bird Without a Name, or BWN, as we like to call her.
BWN.
Which sounds like a new boy band from,
It
somewhere.
does, it does. Okay, I'm opening chat so that I can see what everybody is
And
saying.
I'm going to see if I can find the Q&A. Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
this topic, as you know, hits me pretty close to home.
Oh, I guess, wait, I'm getting mug, 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 and it's early, so I forgot
Oh, it's
mug, mug,
very
mug.
early. You people are so
I know
advanced.
you guys are good. I wasn't thinking about mug, mug, mug because it was early, but I'm going to show you anyway in case I forget. Early mug, says Tom. Yes.
I brought my smart women
Oh,
mug
nice.
because it thirst for knowledge.
Thirst for knowledge is good. I brought a mug that, well, you'll see why it makes perfect sense.
Oh, yay.
National Council for History Education mug. The history matters, and so does coffee mug. Because,
Original one, I think.
pardon?
I think that's the original one we
That
first.
is the original one. And absolutely, it needs to be saluted today. So, okay, now I didn't mean to interrupt you, but people
No,
were calling for the mug. And for those of you who have not been here before, I have had a mug every week that is thematically related. This one was just not hard for me to choose.
right. That's a
So,
no-brainer.
go.
Um, No, what I was going to say is so many of us were talking about in the chat that we received Jessica's letter that she sent out to all NCHE members, but also posted on the Facebook group. She does those weekly affirmations that always give me a lift. And she always seems to know when to post them, like right when you need it the most. She's good about that. But uh, about an hour after Jessica's statement came out, Joanne, you probably got these. The AHA and the OAH released a joint statement, very similar to what Jessica had put. And I believe NCSS signed on to that with some other organizations. And it just made me feel like, a lot of times teachers say, oh, do I want to renew my dues or do I want to join these organizations? And when those letters came through my inbox yesterday, I thought, I am so glad that we have these organizations to have our back. Because NCHE and AHA and OAH came to bat for us here in Virginia, and I've seen them do it in other states. And with what's going on now, I don't think you guys understand how important organizations like National Council for History Ed and American Historical Association, they are boots on the ground advocating. And in our case in Virginia, our state board of education told us to our face that even after hundreds of teachers came and testified when they tried to change our state standards to fit this patriotic version of what they're pushing now at the federal level, they thought the teachers were whining because they didn't want to do more work. They said that to our face. But in the same sentence, they said, but now that the real historians have spoken up, maybe we need to take a second look.
Wow.
Because these organizations had sent letters and in some cases showed up in person, they did finally backtrack on much of the most egregious things that they were trying to put in there. So I put this in the chat, and I don't get any money from NCHE, so I'm not like ever. You can be a member and you don't have to be a teacher, right? So one of the best ways you can support what's going on is to join organizations like NCHE and say, I want my due money or whatever. Or you can make a donation. You don't even have to be a member. You can say, I want it to go towards advocacy for real history being taught in our schools. And trust me, they're going to put it there. So I was thrilled when we did the live version, Joanne, a couple of years ago in Salt Lake. We had a few members of History Matters when we did the live, and they came and they paid to come to the conference and they joined NCHE specifically for that reason. And that just made me so happy. But I feel like now more than ever, because a lot of these organizations, the great program they do for teachers is grant funded. And, with everything so up in the air, now more than ever is the time to find the organizations that are doing the good work and not going to lie over and just take what's going on. And I think that's
Absolutely.
important.
Absolutely. And I will say actually just this last week, listening to people, I guess, is it the OAH or the AHA that David Blight is now the president of, my colleague at
I want
Yale?
to say OAH. I want
OAH
to.
could be. At any rate, so we were talking in a meeting about the fact that all of these organizations are very much stepping forward to talk about what should happen, to make statements about what should happen, to join together and figure out actions to do. So absolutely. And NCHE as well. I mean, I first came to NCHE with this idea because it was about, history, the teaching of history. But our community here is definitely not all teachers. And that has been one of the things that makes me really happy because education is about everyone, and history education is about everyone. So I totally support, I applaud everything you just said, Annie. I think that's so important. And particularly now, we need to be speaking in every way we can, and membership numbers count. Dues matter, and just simple numbers matter. If people are stepping up and saying, I am with you, I support you, and numbers grow, that matters too.
Yeah, and some people were saying that they didn't get Jessica's message, and a few people were saying that they didn't understand it. So I am happy. I'm just going to put this out here right now. If anybody wants to email me, I will get on Zoom with you. I will take that letter paragraph by paragraph if need be, because I didn't feel like it had a lot of educational jargon in it at all. But I can see that if you don't have kids in public schools, your kids are all grown. If it's not, resonating with you, and that's the other thing. I live in a neighborhood that has a lot of retirees, and they say, well, why should I keep, letting my taxes go up to pay for public schools? Well, you really liked it when we had that snow removal a couple weeks ago, right? And you really liked it when someone comes and fixes your air conditioning, and that all requires an education, right? To learn how to operate all those different, services that we all take advantage of in our daily lives. Somebody taught that person how to read, or someone taught that person in a practical course how to, do that job. And so just because you don't have kids in schools anymore doesn't mean that you don't rely on the public education that everyone in your community has, that keeps our communities going. So everything we do in our community is based on the ability to read and write and think and speak and communicate and problem solve. And that's all public schools for the most part. So that's
And
that's my
that's
TED talk for today.
no, it's good. It's a good TED Talk. And the thing is, when I was reading through um executive statements and everything else this morning in preparing for this episode, and seeing all of the talk of indoctrination, right? That supposedly this administration is fighting indoctrination. And when you sort of dig around, indoctrination is the idea that, which is why I addressed it in my comments. Indoctrination is the idea that the United States has done some things that are wrong. If you can't acknowledge that your country has done some things that are wrong, you're lying. I mean, you're blatantly creating a fairy tale. Nothing is perfect. No country is perfect. And this nation has done things that are wrong. And ideally, we learn from them, right? If you're fighting the fact that this country has done things that are wrong, that we need to learn about them and that that's part of education, and if you're claiming we need to stop indoctrinating students with the idea that somehow or other we've done things that are wrong in the past, you are plainly stating you don't want this country to be any better than it is now, and probably worse. You just are. So, this is not directly on topic of what we're talking about this morning, but part of the doublespeak of what I was reading in government statements this morning about fighting indoctrination, by indoctrinating students to not think certain things, or I urge you again, as I always do, to read carefully, read closely, and think very hard about some of the words that are being thrown at us, particularly concerning education and what does and doesn't count, or what should or shouldn't happen, because there's a lot of 1984-ish rhetoric being thrown around, and it can be very crafty the way that it's being used. What was I reading this morning about? We should never think about people in terms of race. Everyone should be seen as an individual. Well, yes, everyone should be seen as an individual. And as a country, we judge people very often based on race in
Yeah.
one way or another. So we can't pretend that we don't do that. We certainly can't pretend we haven't done that. And making it sound all, fair and cheesy and happy, like we're all individuals and nothing else matters. Well, in some other world that might be true, but in this world where we have a history and we have institutions and organizations over time that have developed and have histories and have shaped who we are and where we are and what we can and can't do, all those things matter, and we have to be grown-ups and look at it and educate ourselves about them. And that should be part of the project of education. Who have we been and who can we be?
Yeah. I woke up this morning to an email from a teacher who is frequently here. I don't know if she's here today, and I don't want to say her name because she might not want it said, but a high school teacher from Chicago, and she was trying to explain race to her students. And she remembered me showing them, I guess, in the mapping inequality map, the redlining map that has gotten so much attention that our guys built at U of R, they added a new keyword search. So you can search for a word and it'll tell you how many times that word was mentioned when they were rating all these different cities. And so that's how she explained to the students. She was able to put in different race and ethnicity words and show them, and it actually literally maps it out instantly. Like says, here's where this word was used to describe the demographics of this neighborhood. And then it immediately generates a little map on the side to show you all the places. So she used that, and the kids were like, oh, we get it. So it does inform things like who gets to live in what neighborhood, and who gets these government loans to buy a house, which does lead to your family's prosperity. It was just interesting. We need more things like that. And those are the types of things that they're trying to suppress with these bills. And that's what scares me is erasing all the data on the scientific websites. It's as if long COVID never existed. What are future med students going to use? What are scientists? My niece is a scientist doing genetic research, and all of her databases went down. Now, luckily, they had backups, but I don't think
This is
people
exactly
realize
what
the
I,
pitfall.
yeah, this is what I meant when I said, um, Department of Education, in part, what it's doing is getting information about education throughout the nation, different states, different localities, so that we have that information about how things are working. So yeah, why, along with all of these other efforts, why not eliminate that kind of information so you can just deny whatever you want to deny and actually not deal with reality? So.
I've been really impressed, like here locally at UVA. Um, I think I mentioned this before. They canceled the student-led tours because some parents were fighting back because they didn't want to learn the truth about who built the university or how it was built or how it came about. Um, it makes me sad to think that future generations are just going to think, what, these things just popped up out of the ground overnight? They're not, they don't they don't want people to have to encounter anything unpleasant. Well, that's not the real world. And you're doing your children a disservice if you make them think everything is My Pretty Pony land. They won't be able to cope.
And Lori just said along the lines of what we're saying here, an educated population is dangerous to autocrats because educated people have the ability to think for themselves. Yep, which is what
And
we
vote
be doing
and
right.
vote based on having an
And
education.
vote right. Again, education has been political from the dawn of the Republic because it was understood that in a country based on its citizenry, an educated citizenry is the key to everything. So anyway, okay. I'm sure we have a lot of questions.
Oh, yeah.
And
I'm sure we do too. All right. I'm going to start with our good friend Daniel Abramovich, who's with us quite frequently. Daniel, he has two questions, so I need to go back and find the first one. Okay. Uh, okay. He says, my Sisyphean question, really, it's kind of early for a big word like that, Daniel. I've only had one cup of coffee. My
I haven't
Sisyphean
even. Yeah.
My Sisyphean question is about how to combat disinformation. He says he knows we've talked about this before, but he says the folks that show up at meetings with more emotion than facts usually don't listen to those facts. It's a matter of blunting them out, or if there's any way to have them believe the facts that they see themselves. So we'll start with that.
What can we do about misinformation?
Misinformation. This, just so you know, this is actually, help me out, Carolee. This is the week that Media Literacy Week. I believe we're coming to the end. So all week there's been lots of posting online from great organizations, and Troy, our good friend, has been posting a lot of those online this week or reposting them. So this is a good question, Daniel, to end that Media Literacy Week.
Oh, Karen, I just joined NCHE, retired RN. Thank you, Karen. Look at that. And I don't get money from
I
NCHE.
don't either. That's why I feel like we can say it
We can,
because
exactly.
we're freelancers.
Exactly. We're, at any rate, well, I don't have the absolute answer as to what can we do about misinformation. But one thing that, where did I read it this last week? Somewhere I was reading about how to deal with people on a personal level with people who are um, loudly asserting really wrong things at you. And one of the suggestions, and this is the most obvious thing in the world, but I'm going to say it anyway, is rather than getting caught up in the emotion of that, is to actually say, well, what exactly do you mean by oomph? So in other words, actually taking it down 800 notches of emotion, someone says, but what about blah, blah? And you can say, oh, that's an interesting question. What do you mean by blah, blah? Because sometimes, which is sometimes why sometimes when I have these Friday morning conversations, I start out with definitions. Um, I don't, as far as misinformation and disinformation, obviously we need to be educating our children to recognize it. We need ourselves to be pausing and slowing down and considering where information is coming from. And I understand how hard this is because I myself find myself getting emotionally swept up into things, and then I have to like pull the brakes on and actually look up people will email me or contact me and say, "Did you hear this thing?" And particularly if it's someone I know, my immediate instinct is to get angry, right? And then I have to actually look it up, and then sometimes, wonderfully, it's not true. But I don't have the absolute solution to that, except that understanding the severity of that problem and being able and willing to step forward and say, not just that's wrong, but oh, that's interesting. What do you mean by that? Because actually blah, blah, blah means blah, 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 and kind of seeing where that goes. It's very easy for me to sit here and say, be rational and logical and calm. But if you're talking about misinformation on a person by person level, sometimes at least that's a starting point. I'm trying to keep up with the conversation, which I can never do because
No.
um,
Um, there's a lot of talk in the chat about accountability and that if we don't have the federal government there anymore. But the other thing is the NAEP scores, which is a national assessment that comes out periodically. The latest reading and math scores came out. And of course, those scores have been flatlined for at least 20 years. And so to take one data point and base your whole opinion on how our public schools are doing, again, that's not data literacy. So data literacy alongside media literacy is an important skill to teach, which we do teach those in public schools. Um, and I think it's important to understand that a lot of the problem with public schools is we have relied on these multiple choice tests, which is the lowest level cognitively to assess a child. And it really has made education, the quality of education go down because teachers, going all the way back to No Child Left Behind, forcing people to pass a test instead of teaching them the skills they really need has made it very difficult for teachers to do creative things like we see people like Carol Lee doing in their classrooms or others who are here with us. And so something I've been fighting for practically my whole career is to not make only one type of assessment. So what we call a performance assessment, where the kids do something with that information, where they take an essay written by Joanne Freeman and break that down and compare it alongside a primary source like a Hamilton, document. That is what is actually better for kids to learn history. It also is a lot more interesting for them, so they tend to want to dig into something like that. But when we just ask them to memorize 3 facts about Hamilton, they'll do it. Most of the kids will do it to pass the test because they want the diploma or they want the piece of candy that their teacher bribed them with or whatever. But that's not good teaching and that's not really learning. And so, first, they try to control us by forcing these multiple choice tests and putting really high stakes on them. When that didn't work, now they're just trying to abolish it altogether. And that's what I fear. So I get it if you don't have kids in public schools, or even if you do, a lot of parents just trust that when they put that kid on the bus, that the school knows what they're doing. You do need to ask questions and you do need to show up for parent conferences, but don't show up as if the teacher in the school is your enemy. Show up as you are partners in this and you are all have one thing in mind. You want what's best for that kid. That's what I think we've gotten away from the last 10 years or so. And that makes me sad because I used to sit in parent conferences and the parents came in and said, "How can I help you?" And now my friends are sitting in parent conferences and the parents are like, "How can I get you fired?" And that's not okay. And that's not helping your kid. So that's my second TED Talk of the day.
TED Talks are good. Your TED Talks are good. How can I get you fired? Is one of the ways in which actually having organizations that actually can watch out and notice what's happening and say, well, whatever it is you think is happening actually isn't. Again, information. There's a book of actually it's about early America, but the title of it is Knowledge is Power. Sure is. And so if you're trying to eliminate agencies that in part are about collecting knowledge, wonder why you might want to do that, right? And particularly given that these aren't huge, like the Department of Education isn't a huge agency with a bazillion-dollar budget and a million gazillion employees. It just isn't. So anyway, yes, knowledge is power. Is that Schoolhouse Rock too? I don't know.
Oh, I loved school. Teachers still use that. And that's from when I was a little kid in the 70s, but they are still teachers that are using those. And some people were asking in both the Q&A and the chat. So I've put this in a couple of times. I'm going to put it in again. The Newslit organization, there are others who do it well, but to me, they have some of the best materials and they're free. And so I like,
So you have you listed newslit.org a couple of
yeah.
times. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, newslet.org is an organization that puts resources out for free, which I'm a big OER, open educational resources person. So you don't have to have a login or anything to access the materials. It's anyone can get in there. You don't have to give up your private information, but they create really wonderful infographics to break down for students and for the general public things like how do you fact check a newspaper article or something you see on the TV? How do you fact check a political campaign ad that you get in your mailbox? How do you fact check things you see on social media? And they just do a really good job, I think, of making it very simple for kids and grown-ups to understand the process. Like there's something called lateral reading, which I also recommend, and I'll put something in the chat when I find it. Lateral reading is that you look at two or three different websites to sort of fact check something or see how something is being explained in more than one place. So you're not just reading one source and taking it as gospel, right? You're saying, okay, here's what the New York Times says, here's what the Washington Post says, here's what the LA Times says, here's what, and there's websites like allsides.org and ProCon, where they will let you know the level of media bias of certain organizations. Are they in the center? Are they left leaning, right leaning, far left? I really like to show kids those types of sites and then let them read two or three articles from each of those types of sources, and kids can see that. So lateral reading is an important skill. I stress that with pre-service teachers a lot because it's not something I was taught. It's only something that's been in the last few years developed as a real way to teach kids how to understand that just because you read it in one place or hear it in one place doesn't mean it's true. And it's an important skill. Yeah,
That's TED Talk number 3.
it is. I'm sorry.
No, I
Too
didn't
much
say
needs
that
to
to make you
be. Dr.
stop.
Ayers has to put up with this all the time. I do this. I go off like this
I
all the
didn't
time.
say that to make you stop. I said that because it's good. It's good. That's why I said that you're going to have a lot to say on this episode.
It's
So, yes. I look at this. Kay says that Heather's letter revealed that Google changed dates on old immigration roundup articles to current dates to give the illusion of a greater impact. Well, right. I mean, so we're at this moment, and the Department of Education is just one example of many things in which there are going to be things that supposedly are official records that are either gone or messed with. I mean, yeah. Oh, I'm trying to keep up here.
So Becca has a great question, and Becca is a parent of school age kids, and she said that her kids want to know more about state versus federal funding and how can states keep the funds in this current situation and protect the kids and teachers in their state. To me, Becca, one of the greatest things you can teach them is how to write a letter to their elected officials and send that letter and let them know what they as students are thinking. But then you as a parent and your neighbors as parents can also write letters and say, we want our funds to stay, under local control, because the people who work with my kids every day, and she's in a hybrid situation, part homeschool, part going to school. There's so many different versions of that, and there's a need for that in many cases. I have lots of friends who are part homeschool, part public school, and I have some that are all private, all public. We need those choices, but we also need to understand that we should not be funding people's personal choices or personal beliefs over the benefit of the majority. And that's where I am very concerned. So, Becca, I hope that answered that question. And my email has been put in there. I'm happy for you to email me, and I'll hop on Zoom and have a discussion with any of y'all on any of these topics, because they're important and we need to talk it out and not just yell at each other and continue to be mean and cancel programs that are helping a lot of kids.
And like Carolee's like, she really is happy for everyone to email her.
I mean, I don't want my email inbox flooded, but in this case, it's important enough, and you guys are my community. So I don't just give it out willy-nilly, but I do give it out to y'all. So
Yeah. Yeah. So at any rate, yeah, all of this is part of why, I mean, all of the things that we're talking about here, which are about, if we're talking about misinformation or disinformation or diversity or equity or inclusion, all of the TED Talks, in one way or another, are, about education, which ultimately is about the freedom to think. Right. I mean, so that's, when people are talking about indoctrination, when we're teaching, what we're trying to do is get our students to think for themselves. That's the point.
yeah. And I'm gonna embarrass her. I hope she doesn't get mad. Cece Flynn, who is an awesome historian who is here every week. She's the one that took us on that really great field trip of the Mammoth cheese one time, if you were here. We've hired Cece to write up a couple of learning resources for us, breaking down the AHA report on what's really happening in public schools. So AHA, American Historical Association, came out with a report a couple months ago where they, for 2 years, talked to tons of teachers across the country. What are you doing in your classroom? And turns out they're not indoctrinating your kids. That's not the findings that they had. They went to red states, blue states. Anyway, we asked Cece as a historian if she could break it down in bite-sized pieces, and we're going to put it out as a module that current teachers and future teachers can use to sift through this very large document, because most people don't have time to read the whole thing. I'm just going to be honest, but there's important data in there. So she's going to help us break that down. And now she's probably mad, like, she likes to stay under the radar, but sorry, Cece, it's going to be awesome. And people are really excited about it. So
And that's wonderful. That's exactly where we started. That's invaluable, that information. It shows us what's really happening on the ground. And that's, largely the Department of Education is about information, getting information so that we can better judge what's happening on the ground. So yeah, and Cece, thank you. That's wonderful.
Very excited and fortunate to have Cece on our team.
Yes, yes. It would not, somehow I saw that the big G's began circulating in that.
Clearly did the big cheese this week at her class. So we were all posting pictures from Cece's field trip.
Yes, indeed.
Y'all don't know about the mammoth cheese. I'll post the website from Monticello. It's a pretty fun story.
It's my favorite. It truly is my favorite. So anytime it's mentioned, I just perk up. The big cheese. I mean, so the, woke mind virus, woke, all of that stuff. The only people using that are people on the extreme right who want it to be a thing. Right? They're trying desperately to make it a thing. It isn't a thing. But we all know that too. I'm trying to catch up again with the
thing that gives me hope, Joanne, though, is that for the most part, the generation of kids that are currently in school or just recently graduated from high school and college, they are really starting to speak up and say, hey, you can ban whatever you want in the school, but we can still find it, right? You can't ban the entire internet, right? You can take government-sponsored websites down. You can pull data down. I know that the Internet Archive, which that's another person I donate almost every week, I send those people a check. They are archiving everything, including a lot of that public data, history data, scientific data, public health data. So you can pull down everything you want if it makes you feel like you're fitting your agenda or whatever. But there are people who actively in early January were making backup copies of that data. Thank goodness. Um,
Exactly.
so that
Exactly.
research on things like long COVID, which is real because I know people that are still experiencing after effects of it. And my niece's genetic research, she's, it was grant funded by NIH. Her data came back to her within 24 hours because of the thoughtful people, the scientists who spent hours backing that stuff up, knowing that this was coming. They
Right.
knew this was
Right.
going to happen.
Absolutely. And I watch for that and
Those
see
people are heroes.
that yes, that people are backing up and saving data of all kinds. And the fact that they're doing that, they're not creating data, they're just saving what's out there, which again highlights the degree to which people are trying to erase facts, data, history, reality. Um, when we know it's happening and where are these people who are backing it up for us, again, that's part of what the Department of Education also does. Um, so important. Actually, those are other people to support, are people who are doing all of that backing up of knowledge, so that it can't be erased.
And the younger constituents, I'm going to call them constituents, they know how to find that data. So you can make it difficult to find, but they're still going to find it. And when they do, it makes them not want to trust the quote unquote adults who tried to hide it from them.
Oh,
Because
for sure.
the best way to get a kid to read a book is to ban it, right? Like so
Oh,
many
right.
so many books that I was told you're not supposed to read that went to the top of my list as a teenager. And I saw that as a teacher. So I didn't ban things in my classroom. I said, let's make some informed choices and let's have a talk with mom and dad to make sure that they understand that you're reading this book. And then if you have questions, I'm here, the librarian's here to help you figure these things out. But we're not going to pull a book off the shelf because one parent doesn't like it. That's not serving the best needs of all the kids. So.
Uh, Man, the chat as ever
I
is
agree with Gloria. Gloria says teach kids to analyze um, and use evidence. That is 100% what teachers are doing in history classes. It's all about, and if you look through that Newslit organization and others that we posted, the historical thinking skills are back up your claim with evidence. And that's what we're not seeing in these social media posts. Going on TikTok and saying they're indoctrinating your children will show us the evidence because AHA looked for the evidence and all they found was teachers are trying to teach kids how to think. They're not saying vote this way or this is a bad person, this is a good person. They're saying here's how you look at primary sources, here's how you look at public health data. You decide if you think long COVID is real. You decide if you think, this event happened that way. You decide if this group was treated differently from this group historically. So Gloria, I agree with you. That is exactly what I think 90% of the schools, if not more, are doing. And the ones that aren't doing it, we need to provide help for those teachers. And places like NCHE is where we can provide help. The work Jessica does and her folks do with these workshops that they put on, I've attended some, I've helped with some. They're terrific. And other organizations and museums do some great programming to help teachers that don't know how to do this well. So we're all in it together. Instead of fighting, we should be supporting our museums and these organizations. And I need to stop. Sorry.
no, it's good. I am
Fired up.
fired up is good. Fired up and there's a little fire going up. It's good. This is why I wanted to have this conversation today, because just the idea that the Department of Education would be under attack, um, and the so blatantly obvious lack of good reasons for that, except for control and suppression. I just it shouldn't be allowed to happen. But who knows where we are, whether it will or will not. Um,
I do like the band name Annie Soapbox. Whoever put that in. Thank you, Holly. I was a Holly. Oh, Nancy put that in. That's funny. Polly asked, is the notion to dismantle the Department of Ed more inspired by finance or information education? That's a great question. I think from what we're seeing, the control of money appears to be a big driver in what's been happening the last couple of weeks.
I think that that's true, but I also think that could be a cover.
Yeah,
You can say, oh, the government's too big. We need to cut funding and regulate. And then while you're saying that, you're cutting back on things that you don't have control over. So I don't think that's an either or as far as I'm concerned.
both.
Yeah, it is.
Um, John Howell is asking, trying to understand what the Constitution requires, but aside from departments of state and war or defense now, if Congress creates an executive level agency like education and funds it, the executive can't simply disband it. Is that correct? So he's asking, do they have that? I guess, do they have that authority? And I think that's what's being tested right now. Congress is saying you can't dismantle this.
Right,
We legislated it, but they're just steamrolling ahead as if they can do it. So it's going to get, this is all pushing towards getting it to the court. And I think they're hedging their bets that they think they stacked the Supreme Court. But
right.
I don't know that they have that in the bag the way they think they do, because surprisingly, like Amy Coney Barrett is one that has come out a couple of times that I was really surprised the way she came down on some things. So I'm not sure. I do think we need some SCOTUS reform as well, but I'm not sure that it's
Congress has certain powers, and President Trump is basically just ignoring those powers. Why? Because Republicans in Congress are just sort of sitting down and letting him do what he likes. So as far as they're concerned, Congress isn't putting up much of a stink, but no, he does not have the power to do this. But then comes the eternal practical logistical question. Okay, so he doesn't have power to do this, and what will happen?
Gloria says he can gut it, that he does have that power. I'm not sure he does, Gloria. I guess we're testing that in
We're
real time,
testing that out. He cannot just eliminate it. Um,
gutting it.
Gutting it, it depends on what he does and how he does it. I mean, budgets are budgets, I suppose, but ending it, right, enforcement is, so we're living in a moment where the actual enforcement of constitutional fundamentals is being unfolding right before our eyes. You know, it's not as though we shouldn't have seen this coming once the president was granted this whole idea that if you're doing an official act, you have immunity, which is again nonsensical. But we're watching the testing of what kind of power the president has. At least now we are seeing in some ways pushback by courts. There is some pushback happening now, pushback by organizations which are stepping forward, pushback by people suing different agencies. And we are seeing some pushback, but we're at a moment of test. This is a moment in which we are having our Constitution and how it works and what it stands for and the nature of the national executive and the balance of powers and checks and balances are all being tested on an almost daily basis. They are.
Everybody's saying the word of the week is impoundment. There's a lot of that going on in the chat. The impoundment is gutting the budget and that sort
Right,
of thing.
right.
Freda asked about the history of the Department of Ed in terms of disabilities and also the student loan program. So that's on a lot of people's minds.
And that is part of the Department of Education. I actually pulled that. A large part of the work of the Department of Education is overseeing $1.6 trillion in federal student loans, as well as grants for K through 12 schools. So yes, that is a big part of what the Department of Education does. It's about collecting information. It's about, again, equity, right? It's about seeing what's happening on a state level, getting information about what's happening, and regulating, supervising, and assisting people in having a right to education. As a federal agency, that's essentially what it's doing. And in many ways, when I said that, Andrew Johnson started it because he wanted it to do something along the lines of what the Department of Agriculture did for farmers, which is observing, regulating, assisting. Carter is the person who then came forward and said education is a right. But yeah. Oh, wait. Poof, poof, poof. People are poofing us off here. It's true. We're late. We're a little bit
And I
over.
just started my backup coffee because I always have my cup of coffee for the show and then my backup coffee for the after party, but I had to dip into the backup coffee early. That's how fired up y'all got me.
I was gonna say you've been exhausting your coffee supply for good reason.
My
Uh,
iCivics, which is another great organization that produces good resources if you're trying to explain what the heck is happening to kids. They do terrific work.
it's Daniel said it's weird that Andrew Johnson did something decent. That's true, except that it may also be the case that he did something decent because he didn't ultimately think it would do very much. Like it would shut up Republicans who were, promoting Reconstruction. And then it would just he could say like, yeah, look, I did that, and then sort of walk off. And so I'm not arguing for the great decency of Andrew Johnson by talking about the fact that he happened to be the guy who under his watch is when that happened.
So
Um,
Claire said she was listening to NPR this morning and they talked about impoundment without mentioning it as illegal. So she seems like that would be an important part of the explanation. And Claire, you're chatting to the hosts only. I don't know if you meant to do that, but if you wanted everybody to see that, you got to change it to everyone. Yeah, the Impoundment Act is something that most people don't learn in the typical regular high school, but I bet a lot of teachers have been teaching it this last 2 weeks
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, right. I mean, so that's the if there's anything positive to be saying about this moment, it's that we're being educated about many things, including education. We're being educated the hard way, which is someone threatens us, and then suddenly we have to perk up and say, "Wait, what? You're threatening us in this way?"
And that's another piece of this. Last year and the year before, I know Florida and a couple other places passed state level laws saying that teachers have to post all their lesson plans for the whole year before school starts so that parents can go through every single one of them. And first of all, that's just putting a lot of extra work on teachers and it's unnecessary. It's a waste of time. But more importantly, if you say you have to stick to this very rigid, scripted curriculum, when things happen in the world and the kids don't understand what's happening, if you legislate that a teacher can only teach what's on the script, you take away what we call the teachable moment, which is the best part of every kid's education, which is as things are happening in the real world, you take that as a moment to say, you know what, we're not going to do what we said we were going to do today because this just happened and we need to break that down. So the night the first Gulf War broke out, the next day, I had a lot of military kids, and all they thought was my mom and dad are going to get sent away, right? They were terrified. So I said, yep, we're not talking about this today. We're going to look at what happened last night. Why did President Bush, invade Iraq? What's
Nothing
going
better
on?
than that, the
That's
immediacy of
so
that.
important. So
No, absolutely. And that can become, I have had students say to me that moments when something happened and it upset the students, and I said, okay, let's not talk about this book today. Let's just open up a conversation about the thing that just happened. That those not only are those teachable moments, but that they stand out as vitally important moments because those students felt seen and heard and they were in the moment learning. So yeah, that's we
I
don't,
will
you and I
never
don't
forget.
really.
That day, the superintendent walked in and he used to do that, make unannounced visits. And he walked in and was like, why are they talking about Iraq? This is a US history class. He didn't get it.
Oh.
And a little boy who was in my class said, you need to sit down and listen. He said he didn't know who this guy was. He just saw an old man in a suit. He's like, you need to sit down and listen. This little kid, and then just moved up from Tennessee. And the superintendent looked at him, but he did. He sat down, he stayed the whole hour. And then at the end, he went, wow, I didn't know all that. And so it was a really good moment. My principal was looking at me like, oh my God, she's going to get us in so much trouble again. But it worked, it worked because the kids showed the superintendent that they wanted to know what the heck went on last night and how it's going to impact our community. So
Okay.
teachable moment,
Teachable moment. We are 7 minutes past.
way over. We still have not too many, about 7 questions. People are talking about the rule of law, of course.
Yeah.
We do teach the rule of law. We do teach that in our courses. Gloria wants to talk about the difference between equity and equality. Gloria, I'm happy to follow up with you on that if we run out of time. A lot of people are asking about vouchers versus charter schools.
I think these are big conversations.
Big conversations.
We're well past. So I think for now,
Claire can send the questions that are left.
yeah, say exactly. Claire, send us the questions. Um, so we could have a Department of Education part two. I do want, as ever, to thank you folks for being here for this conversation and engaging in the conversation of democracy on a Friday morning, because this is a great example of that. This is the new band name, When Annie Became Batman, Bat Annie. At any rate, I do want to thank you for being here, for being part of this conversation, which is not only important, but important in this context at this moment. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank NCHE for many, many reasons, but also for supporting this effort. And I want to thank Annie and Claire and Jessica and John and, as ever, you guys. What we're going to do now, just for those who are not normally here, what we're going to do is go to the after party. What that means is that we will no longer be recording. We will be able to be even freer and easier in our conversation than we were while we were recording. Not that we were particularly not free and easy in our conversation today, but if you are watching us through the NCHE website, just say right where you are and poof, you will be in the after party. If you are watching us on Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. That's ncheteach.org/conversations. And then you too, poof, will be in the after party. Okay, I see, and I also see some people have to run away. Don't run away though, stay with us in the after party. Who knows what we'll be talking about next week? Maybe it will be Department of Education Part 2, but odds are there'll be some other crazy thing that we're going to need to talk about, and we'll be here talking about it because that's what this community is about, is engaging with what's going on. So, okay, poof like a ninja, says okay. At any rate, let us go to the after party, in particular because I do not know what got into this little bird, but this bird, I don't know if you've been hearing this bird throughout this entire conversation. It's actually been hard for me to focus because this bird has been so active and I don't know why. Why? Anyway, I can introduce you to the bird at this point, but I guess now is the time for us to segue to the after party. So thank you. Bird has an opinion, man.